A pleasant day and a warm welcome to your favorite show, Law and Order. So, ladies and gentlemen, we were discussing numerous topics with regard to certain areas, and in our previous episode, we discussed about bail, and today we are going to discuss one of the most important topics that you consider is the fundamental rights. In the constitution itself of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka, fundamental rights are mentioned, and everywhere if you see some injustice, if some personal thing happens to you, if a community or a certain group of people are affected with a certain thing, you might feel it's a violation of fundamental rights. Can't we go before the court? Yes, you can, but there's a procedure and there are certain things that you need to know. And first and foremost, the most important thing is that you need to know what fundamental rights are, how it is exercised, and specifically what are the limitations, because rights are there, you can't exceed, there are certain limitations. And to do the honors, we invited Mr. Astika Devendra, attorney at law. So thank you very much, sir, for accepting our invitation and joining with us to do the honors with the topic fundamental rights. And sir, as a quick start, what fundamental rights are?
Fundamental rights are basic rights of humans, which actually came to light after the First and Second World Wars, right? Because they realized that during the time of war, especially in relation to how bombings were done, how prisoners of war were kept, that the parties, even at a situation of war, there were these basic rights that everyone had to ensure, even to each other. So that is how this idea of fundamental rights or basic rights or human rights emerged. Right. So that if you say everybody has rights, right? So you have a right, for example, to walk out of here, but that's not a fundamental right. You have a right to resign from whatever job that you do, that's not a fundamental right. You have a right to eat, but that is also not enshrined as a fundamental right. But fundamental rights are basic things. For example, I give one, that is not to be tortured. That's a fundamental right. That's one of the basic rights are called fundamental rights or human rights.
Human rights. So that is a, yes sir? No, yeah, right. Okay. So that's a small exposure and a small definition that can be given fundamental rights. It's diverse but not majority. But there are certain rights that are identified as fundamental rights, and we can move on because specifically the chapter 3 says about fundamental rights. And so like we have discussed certain programs with regard to fundamental rights, but I feel the necessity to discuss more and go in deeper about those separate fundamental rights, specifically moving to certain cases and other certain limitations. And first, so we do need to have a freedom. For example, people expect their freedom to, there are many types of freedom, and in that particular fundamental rights, so for example, as you said, people, if you want to walk out of this thing, it's my freedom, but I can't move out of this place because I'm limited with some work here and I have certain restrictions to follow. So likewise, there are certain limitations as well. So that freedom word, in a certain sense, in nidahasa, we don't have freedom. So how can you explain that word in a scope of fundamental rights?
Yeah, freedom, irrespective of whether it's fundamental rights or not, freedom means that you're not being stopped from doing something, isn't it? I mean, if you want to sing, then you have the right, freedom to sing, right? But so in a nutshell or in short, it is your right. It is a right which cannot be, which will not be restricted. But having said that, even fundamental rights can be restricted. So freedom is that, I'm sure why you are asking this question is that when you go through chapter 3,
yes,
it says freedom of being, freedom from torture, freedom of thought. So that is why you ask. So that is basically what freedom is. There is no constitutional interpretation given, but that's the interpretation or the explanation that I can think of.
Right. Okay. So that's what I was focusing as well, because at the chapter itself, the freedom of or right to or something like that, it explains. And if a certain certain person who are watching our program might just refer to that piece of legislation, the Constitution of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka, he might see certain wordings, and in the front itself you can sort out the topics as well, beautifully knitted, and go in detail. And what we are going to discuss is that in a practical exposure to discuss those things. And sir, we discuss about the word torture. Can you just explain a little bit more on that?
Yeah. Now, Article 11 deals with not only torture. Now, when we say, I hope the public knows this. Now, the provisions in the constitutions are called article.
Right.
So, as opposed to a normal piece of legislation where you refer to them as sections. So, Article 11 is the section 11 of the Constitution. Section 11, Article 11 of the Constitution deals with freedom from torture and freedom from torture, cruel and degrading treatment and punishment, right? Not only torture.
Right.
So torture is actually causing someone pain, right? It's the difference between torture and assault is that the difference between torture and another form of injury. For example, if someone hits you, you might get injured, right? But that person might do it for different reasons. Here, that particular action is done simply to cause you pain, right? Maybe to get information out from you, or maybe they have animosity towards you. So that is torture, right? That is torture where a person is subjected to. The second part of it, that is cruel and degrading treatment and punishment. That is, for example, it can be even by words. Right, you go to the police station to lodge a complaint, and the police officers actually scold you in filth, right? And it depends on the person also. So that also can amount to degrading treatment and punishment.
Right. Okay. So that is what they initially we discuss about certain words and certain things that we need to discuss about fundamental rights. That is one thing that we discuss is torture. And I'm going to enlighten another word, which is equity. So can you just explain that as well?
Yeah. Equity, you find the word equity in Article 12.
Yes.
Equity or equality?
It's equality. Equality.
Right. Equality you find in Article 11, that is to say you have equality and equal protection of the law.
Right.
Everybody has equality, if everyone is equal, and they have the protection of equal treatment.
Right.
Now we say that is twofold, that actually discusses about two parts of the, let's say, two sides of the same coin. When you see equality, actually we say that is the negative aspect. That is to say, one person cannot be, now for example, when I say I am equal to you, that is I cannot be treated higher than you, right? So that is actually not beneficial to me, it's beneficial only to you.
Yes.
Right? Equal protection of the law in the other sense is that you and I both, right, if you seek, if India is of the law, you must be considered the same. Right. So equality and equal protection of the law goes hand in hand. One is the positive aspect, other is the negative aspect.
Right. Okay. I just read a recent article in a newspaper. It says a beautiful story. A house is being robbed, and the owners of the house has lodged a police complaint that a person has entered the particular area without any authorization, and the person who entered has taken a certain property from that house and left. A CCTV footage of that particular theft, that means the lost equipment, the footage records that the person taking the lost equipment has been recorded in a certain house, so CCTV footage. So the the owners of the house has lost something, and they are going to lodge a police complaint at the police station, nearby police station, that saying that story and this has been committed. And in that case, they don't need to find the lost thing, but they need to have some sort of a security. And if this thing happens once again, if that person or any other person comes and threaten or endanger their lives, it might be a serious issue. Can that be related with fundamental rights?
No. Because, no, in the sense, it's like this. Now, human rights, I mean, there are many rights.
Right.
All the rights are not human rights. Then you have human rights. All the human rights are not fundamental rights. Fundamental rights are the rights which have been enshrined in the Constitution. And now you have fundamental rights. That fundamental right has to be upheld by everybody. Right? For example, my right to speech, you must also ensure that I have my right of speech.
Right.
But in the sense of the Constitution of Sri Lanka, you can only complain, right, in respect of a violation of the fundamental rights by executive or administrative action.
Right.
Right? So now this is a thief, no?
Yes.
Right? So his action will never tantamount to executive or administrative action. But however, once you lodge the complaint, if the authorities are not taking proper action, then that inaction becomes administrative and executive. Against that, of course, you have your fundamental rights are being violated.
Right. Okay. So that what I wanted to emphasize, and so you knitted it very beautifully, actually, in the sense. So the people think like that if they don't have that particular protection and people come and rob them or damage them, they say that they are fundamental rights. As you said, it's no. But if the proper authorities are not taking proper action, that is a violation of fundamental rights. So ladies and gentlemen,
can I interject?
Yes. Better,
now, for example, with the same example. Now we see every day very pathetic situation, wild elephants destroying houses, taking lives, destroying villages. Now there is no fundamental rights there.
Yeah.
You can't charge the elephant for violating your fundamental rights. But there is a violation on the part of the executive not taking preventive action to ensure the lives of the people. Right? So there is a violation there.
There's a violation there, not providing that proper protection. Right. Okay. So in this distinguish, we just compare two instances, one with the elephant case and one with the robbery case. So how the fundamental rights comes into context with regard to that theft thing. If the police is not taking proper action, you can just manage it there. But it's not when the theft is occurred, you can exercise your fundamental rights. But when it comes to the wildlife story and the elephant thing, that is another thing. And so when moving on ahead, and we have the freedom to speak, but there's a limitation. We can't defame a certain person, a certain sort of a defamation. So can you just explain on that as well?
No, it's like this. Defamation actually doesn't come within the ambit of fundamental rights. It's like this. You have a right to speak.
Right.
In the Constitution itself, your right of speech can be, it has been said that it can be restricted. Because when you take the chronology of the Constitution, starting from Article 10 to Article 17, someone familiar with law, of course, knows this. But when you take Article 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, there are certain rights. Some rights given to all, some rights given to citizens only. Article 15 stipulates how fundamental rights can be restricted. Right? There is only one fundamental right, two fundamental rights. That is the right of thought. Right? Right of thought, that cannot be restricted. And the freedom from torture, that cannot be restricted. All the other fundamental rights, your right of speech, your right of union, all can be restricted in certain situations. For example, to ensure religious harmony. Right? Just because you have a right of speech, that doesn't mean that you can't make hate speech against another religion. So that is enshrined in the Constitution itself. Right? But going further, there is no right, no situation where you can be restricted from defaming another person in the fundamental rights chapter. For example, if I want to say something defaming against you, I can do that. And there is, or even let's say, even by executive action, right? You can do that. However, there is a separate remedy. That remedy comes in the form of damages or otherwise in the district court. If you defame a person, right? We will not get into the ingredients of defamation, but if you in fact defame someone, that person will be can be brought before the district court and damages can be recovered from him.
Right. Okay. So the purpose of asking that question is like people think that the right of speech or the liberty to speak is being restricted to a certain extent where a certain person is not defamed by another. So as you said, it's not a certain fundamental right, that is mean like a limitation.
No,
Right.
not to be defamed is not a fundamental right. It's nothing to do with fundamental rights. It's like, for example, it's personal laws, right? I mean, it's like if you and I are neighbors, right? If you're growing up, if there is a jack tree on your land which is affecting me, then I have a right. That is in the district court. In the same way, if you do something defamatory, then it's in the it's nothing to do with fundamental rights.
Right. So another thing related to that, people might misunderstand. I'm going to question you, sir. We can assemble and do certain discussions or whatever it is, but there is a certain thing called unlawful assembly. Is it the same as what the right of speech and defamation, or is it also not mentioned in fundamental rights?
No, it's like this. You have a right of union, that is to get together. That right is there, right? That can be for any purpose, right? It can be to have a sing-a-song, it can be to have a party, it can be males or females, whatever, whatnot. But that cannot be restricted. However, what unlawful assembly is something which comes in from criminal law. That is, if people get together with the common object of doing a crime, right? It might be to hurt someone, rob, steal. In that sense, that becomes an unlawful assembly. If that is an unlawful assembly, and if you commit a crime, then you can be charged for that crime as well as the unlawful assembly. Or let's say that you get together for an unlawful assembly and you don't commit the crime. Still, for all, you can be charged for that. That also is kept away. That is that just because you have the right of union doesn't mean that you can get together and try to do harm to others.
So that explanation, I think it might be clear to you. Speech, defamation, assembly and unlawful assembly. So you have to understand well relating to fundamental rights. We are discussing on this because to give a better idea, a concise piece of information for you all to think on this. And so like for example, there are certain things that 14A, I suppose, if I'm not mistaken, the right to information under the fundamental rights. So that right to information, how does it apply?
No, Charita, may I just look at the Constitution? For right to information, right, is not enshrined in our Constitution, right? Article 14 deals with certain rights, certain freedoms, right to expression, so on and so forth. Now, how right to information has come in is in this way. It's very good that you asked that question because there is no specific provision. But I say there's an inalienable right of thought, conscious and conscious.
Right.
Now, how can you have right of thought without the proper information?
Right.
You're right. For example, if we make it easier for the public to understand, now, not at my age, but your age, you have interested in the fairer sex, right? So you will decide from several ladies which girl or that you like.
Yes.
That is because you have a choice and you know what that person is. You might like a person who can sing, you might like a person who can dance, you might like a dark person, a fairer person. That is because you know about those people. Right? Now, that thought, your thought of I like her, that thought is a result of a process. Because you've been given those information. Right? You might ask their friends, how is that girl? Does she have a boyfriend? Right? Yes. Where do they come from? That before you make that decision, before you have that thought, you need to have information.
Yes.
And then freedom of speech, other freedoms that together expression. How can you express without not knowing? Now that is one of the main problems that we have, right? Not only in Sri Lanka, in the world. People talk about other religions without actually not knowing. Right? They think their one religion is superior, the other is inferior, but without actually not knowing. So for whatever thought or whatever right for you to exercise any right, right? For thought, for expression, first of all, information must come in. Right? So that is why when you take the authorities, our courts have regularly held, yes, even though it is not there in so many words, right to information is also a fundamental right because it affects the other rights.
Rights, okay. So it's very much clear about the right to information, how it specifically applies. And sir, are there any limitations for that right to information?
No, because right to information is not there in so many words. That has not been also restricted. So there is nothing in those words. But when you look at the legal regime that we have,
right.
Now, especially with the passing of the Right to Information Act, the Right to Information Act itself says that there are certain information which can be withheld. For example, if you ask someone, now let's say someone write to the SLRC and ask for your salary. Information, they can withhold that information. But since right to information is not there in so many words in the Constitution, there is no restriction also placed in respect of that.
Right, okay. So, and moving ahead, and if suppose that if there is anything happen in a certain violation of fundamental rights, how can I proceed with a court action?
Yeah. Now, in our country, can I hopefully we have some time, yes?
Yes, couple of minutes.
Right. So 1972 Constitution was the Constitution which first recognized what fundamental rights. But with that Constitution, it never gave a forum. Right? It identified what fundamental rights are, but never said what you can do with it. Right? So, but with the 1978 Constitution, our present Constitution, Article Chapter 3, it enshrines the Constitution, and Article 17 read with Article 126 says that you have to go to the Supreme Court. So only the Supreme Court, no other forum, you have to go to the Supreme Court. Limitations there is a main limitation is there is a time bar. That is from the infringement, if you put it in so many very simplest forms, if it is an action that you are complaining of, from the date of the action that you get to know of the action, then within 1 month of that day, you have to file a petition before the Supreme Court.
Supreme Court after the infringement 1 month.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So in that case, for example, a person might think that my fundamental rights are infringed. So he knows well aware about that 1 month period, and normally the formal procedure, we can't go just to go to the Supreme Court and tell this is what we need to do. So assistance of an attorney at law is necessary. So how can we proceed? So can you just explain in a simpler manner?
Yeah, so since it's in the Supreme Court is functioning in Colombo, most of the attorneys who are there, who are actually practicing in fundamental rights, are in Colombo. So you have to actually go and get help. But if there are certain situations where you have financial difficulty, there are certain other forums, like there is the committee of the Bar Association, legal aid. That a committee sometimes provides, and there is this legal aid commission that they also provide legal assistance if they see it fit. So those are the 3 ways actually if you want to file a fundamental rights application. But there is another situation, another situation, that is you can write to, I mean, if you can't, let's say you don't have money or you're in Jaffna, you can't come to Colombo, you can write to the Chief Justice and say that my fundamental rights have been violated. Now, I hope that everybody doesn't, flood the Supreme Court with letters. It's only in special situations where that will be entertained.
Right. So that is the most important thing. So we know about fundamental rights, we know how they are violated, and just certain controversial things we discussed with regard to right of information, and even with regard to the speech and defamation, and with regard to the assembly and unlawful assembly, you know what fundamental rights are and how it is infringed and what are the consequences. You know all those things, but you must know the proper procedure, how to proceed, and there are certain special circumstances and specific things that you can focus and the way that you need to proceed. And we discussed many areas, and we just went in deeper to certain wordings that are mentioned in the Constitution itself to give you a better idea about what fundamental rights are, and to explain some specific words in a different manner, and to give you a precise, clear definition about some legal terminologies which are used but seems to be fundamental rights but not enshrine certain other things. So thank you very much, sir, Mr. Asthikadev, attorney at law, for joining with us to do the honors with regard to the fundamental rights. So ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned with Law and Order. We'll be discussing more interesting topics in the future as well. Thank you very much for watching. Have a pleasant day.